Now it's my honor to introduce Maurice Jones, the President and CEO of LISC. This is a special honor for me because Maurice was my boss at the CDFI Fund early in my career. Since then, I've watched Maurice leave the CDFI Fund to go work in the private sector at the Virginian Pilot in Norfolk. He then moved to state government in the Commonwealth of Virginia, returned to federal government at HUD, and finally returned to the CDFI industry to lead one of the nation's largest CDFIs. His career trajectory has been impressive and rapid, and if I can use a Maurice-ism, it makes my head hurt. Maurice is going to MC the next segment of our plenary, National Policymaker Reflections on Lending Where It Counts. Please join me in welcoming Maurice Jones.
Well, good morning. It's nice to be with you this morning. You can ignore whatever Donna said. So I'm going to try to moderate this first panel, which is a really exciting panel. We've got 4 policymakers. We've got a former cabinet secretary. We've got a current White House official. We've got a bank regulator, and we have the U.S. Treasurer. And we're going to reflect on places that for them have special meaning and have guided their policy work, and places that we all have some familiarity with. The way this will work is I will, one by one, talk to each of them for about 10 minutes apiece, and then we will go to the next session. I want to start by reflecting on a place that for me has been important in all of my work, and that's my hometown, a little place called Kinbridge, Virginia, which is a town of 1,200 people in rural Virginia. My daughter jokes me all the time that her school is larger than my hometown, and she's right. But what I saw in that hometown when I was growing up was a grandfather who, because of his race, had gone to school for 6 years in a barn, but had managed through many years of working in the woods and then owning a sawmill, a small sawmill. We were tobacco farmers and cattle farmers and corn farmers. A guy who, but for him, I wouldn't be here. That is a place that still exists in many places around the country today, a place that matters and a place that continues to be in need of the work that CDFIs do all across the country. And I know that there are plenty of you out there serving them, and we need more, and we need to do more, and we need to stay faithful. And that's what this discussion is about this morning. So we're going to start by inviting my good friend Bill Bynum up, and Bill will introduce our first panelist, and we'll have a discussion. Bill, as many of you know, is the president and CEO of Hope Enterprise, as well as their Policy Institute and the credit union, and Bill is a leading light in this industry. So join me in welcoming Bill Bynum to the stage.
Thank you,
I'll leave it to you.
Mike Espy served as the 25th United States Secretary of Agriculture. He was both the first African American to hold that position and the first person from the Deep South to be U.S. Agriculture Secretary. Prior to that, Mike was the first African American elected to Congress from Mississippi since Reconstruction. Today, Secretary Espy is a practicing attorney and advisor to heads of states and NGOs on food issues, trade, development, and many other important matters. I first met the Secretary in the early 90s when I asked USDA to support an initiative to bolster jobs and infrastructure in rural North Carolina. That effort injected more than $150 million in private, philanthropic, and public resources in some of the state's most depressed areas. Fast forward to 1995, I had moved to Mississippi, and I was walking on Capitol Street in Jackson, and I saw Secretary Espy, and I approached him. I said, you probably don't remember me, but I'm that guy from North Carolina. And I'd like to tell you about a CDFI that we recently started to improve lives in the Delta. That evening, over dinner at my house, we talked about it, and we've been working together ever since. Few people are as dedicated to improving conditions in America's most vulnerable, for America's most vulnerable people and places than Mike Espy. It's no surprise that when President Clinton entrusted him, along with the late Secretary of Treasury Lloyd Bentsen, to lead the administration's effort to create the CDFI Fund. OFN, it is my distinct honor to present you to my good friend and my board chairman, the Honorable Mike Espy.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, Mr. Secretary.
Well, good morning, and excuse my voice.
You're
this is
all
what
right.
you have today.
You're all right. You're all right. Welcome, and so just so you know, we've got 10 minutes. They're counting us down, and I'm going to try to keep us on time.
I'll try to be succinct.
Well, let me kick us off. The theme, as you know, is lending where it counts. I wonder if you could start by sharing a personal connection to a place that counts for you, a place that has informed your work as a national policymaker, and
Sure.
where finance has probably been a theme.
All right, well, thank you. And succinctly, let me just say, Bill Bynum just introduced me as some, I'm not sure everything he said was true, but I warmed my ears. I just want to repay the favor. Bill, of course, I'm the chairman of Hope Enterprise Corporation, but Bill is the CEO and president, and under Bill's leadership, we started as a $1.5 million fund, and in 25 years, we're now over $400 million. So that's, and I can't go on without saying hello to Lisa Mensah. Lisa also was a former member of the Hope Enterprise Corporation Board of Directors. She left us to go to USDA. I understand that, and she's not on my, I don't have a custom ringtone for Lisa, but almost.
But you get one.
Yeah, so the theme to your question, the theme of this conference, OFN, is impact lending where it counts. And I've got two quick stories. One is August 2005, we had a level 5 hurricane, Hurricane Katrina, that roared ashore, devastated New Orleans, but it also, the impact was South Mississippi, Mississippi Gulf Coast. And they just tossed cargo ships and cargo containers. It ripped up the Highway 90, and they just obliterated homes all along the southern coastline. And because of the New Markets tax credits, Hope Enterprise Corporation, where we work in Mississippi and Alabama, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Arkansas now. And so we came into New Orleans and South Louisiana, but also Mississippi, and helped with others, of course, to rebuild with CDFI lending to rebuild these areas. We rebuilt the homes up to standard. Areas that had medical clinics destroyed, we came in and rebuilt areas where they were medically underserved. We also supply stores for areas that have food deficits, and that's the power of impact lending. So that's pretty recent. But I have to tell you, there was another one that's dear to my heart. Now, every politician has a vanity wall. In my office, at my vanity wall, I, of course, got pictures of me with President Mandela even before he became president of South Africa. But the favorite picture is of me standing in a kitchen in Fayette, Mississippi. And there are three people. One is a 4-year-old girl. She's on the kitchen counter with her hand under the faucet, cutting on water coming out of her faucet in her grandmother's kitchen for the very first time in either of their lives. And we did this in 1993 with impact lending from USDA, which really remains the largest rural lender in America, to take $2 billion, and with the guidance of Wall Street experts, leverage that $2 billion into many times more, and to go all around the country, not just Mississippi, not just West Virginia, but to go all around the country and use that money to build infrastructure, principally for water systems. And so now I believe that because of what we did in 1993, just about every home in America, no matter where they are, no matter how scarce the density might be, they have running water.
Yeah, good stuff. So you were Secretary of Agriculture when the CDFI fund was created. Now you were 12 years old then, so we should disclose that, right?
That's right.
But
I became the secretary at age 39.
There you go. There you go. How about that? And you haven't aged at all.
Thank you. You also lie.
Tell us about those times. Tell us about what the federal government's commitment to the industry has done in terms of making a difference for places like you just described.
Yeah, I was with Lloyd Benson, who is now going on to glory, Secretary of Treasury. I was Secretary of Agriculture when the CDI fund was codified into law. And the remarkable thing about that, Maurice, is it passed by 410 votes in the U.S. Congress. Now, consider in the dynamic of these days, hypersensitive and highly polarized, it passed by 410 votes in the House of Representatives. In the Senate, it passed on a voice vote with no dissenters. And that won't happen.
Sounds familiar.
Look,
sounds familiar. Definitely.
But it's something that we were familiar with, and I'll just give you a very quick background story why President Clinton was able to push this, and we were well known because in 1987, I was a member of Congress, and along with Dale Bumpers, who was a senator from Arkansas, I think that's me, the guy with the black hair.
Yeah, there you go. I don't know if everybody, they can see.
Yeah, behind the president, sitting beside Lloyd Benson. Well, just very quickly, the precursor to CDFI was something called the Lower Mississippi Delta Development Act. And that was passed in 1987, 1988, because not just Mississippi, but Arkansas and Missouri and southern Illinois and northern Louisiana, we drew a zone around areas of persistent poverty. And they just happened to lie within 50 miles on either side of the Mississippi River. So we passed that law, it was codified, and Jamie Whitten, who was Chairman of Appropriations for Mississippi, gave us $17 million. We created a Delta caucus. The Delta Commission was made up of all the governors from the 7 affected states. And we had a principle of taking direct government lending and leveraging it with Treasury Department financing, any way we could legally get money into that area. Whether it was a rider, whether on an appropriations bill, we did that. And so we had, number one, a designated zone. Number two, we had blended lending with direct government assistance that was leveraged by private sector capital with an inkling of philanthropic giving. We made it sure that the third pillar was that any time in the Congress that the appropriators were talking about urban lending, big city lending, we would have our rider and our Delta caucus lobbying for that. And we just made sure that we kept foremost in everybody's mind that the Delta and the rural areas could not be ignored. And so that was the precursor to the CDFI many years later. President Clinton was the president of the Delta Commission, and so he was just well familiar with the concept. So when I became his Secretary of Agriculture, and he became president. We just brought it in.
Good stuff. Well, thank you for that. So we got a minute and a half left. 25 years of the fund, and the industry actually predates the fund, as you were describing.
Yes.
What's your advice to the industry for the next 25 years?
Don't stop. Don't stop. Don't stop. You know, the times are more difficult. We have hyper-partisanship. We have, we have extreme polarization. And it affects the environment. It affects the revenue. It affects the appropriations. In fact, the last time I participated in an OFN event, I introduced Thad Cochran, who now has gone on to his glory. But President Trump had zeroed out the OFN appropriations, and when it came to the Senate, Thad Cochran was able to put it back in. In fact, I believe he gave more money to OFN.
For the fund?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we know we operate in an environment where could be considered somewhat hostile, if you will, but that means that you have to draw upon your expertise and your passion to make sure that these areas that you promote are not forgotten.
Well, Mr. Secretary, thanks for your passion. Thank your service, and
Thank you.
we look forward to more work with you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Hey, nice to be with you. And you go right out here. Okay, our next introducer will be Jim King, the head of FAHI. So Jim, welcome to the podium. Okay.
Thank you, Maurice. As he said, I'm Jim King from FAHI, where I serve as the president. I'm also the OFN board chair. This is just about the best day and the best lineup I could have imagined. I mean, is it great or what, right? So one of the great professional pleasures I have in my life, and I just want to take a moment to talk about lending where it counts. Along with Bill Bynum, who was just up here, a good friend, and 4 other regional CDFIs, we formed the Partners for Rural Transformation. And if you'll just follow your OFN app on the activity feed, we have a new white paper out in draft for you to look at, Transforming Persistent Poverty in America. It's very bold, call for action, and we hope you'll take a moment to look at that. It's now my pleasure to introduce Ann Hazlett. She's the Senior Advisor for Rural Affairs at the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, where she works across all federal government to equip rural leaders with tools to address drug addiction in rural America. Before she joined that team, she was the Assistant to the Secretary for Rural Development at USDA. In this role, she developed and led the department's response to the opioid crisis and creating greater access to behavioral health care. Ann and I found a common bond in our desire to bring an end to persistent poverty and how the opioid crisis is a result of unaddressed poverty, as well as how CDFIs can and should be part of that solution. She's at the front of the federal government's efforts to address the epidemic, spearheading several initiatives and developing new resources. To quote Ann, rural communities and their needs look different than urban. We're focused on ensuring the needs that rural communities have all they need to address drug addiction. In addition to her service at the White House and the Department of Agriculture, she's worked on Capitol Hill as legal counsel for several different state leaders, as well as the Director of Agriculture and Chief of Staff to the Indiana Lieutenant Governor. Please join me in welcoming Ann Hazlett.
Hey, Ann.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good to see you. Have a seat. Thank you for joining us for this discussion. I want to start out with you the same way I started out with the Secretary. Lending where it counts. I wonder if you could share a place of personal connection in your life and how this place has informed your work as a national policymaker and whether development finance was a theme or a part of that story.
Well, thank you for this opportunity to be with such a distinguished crowd and to share a bit of my heart in my travels. For this morning, I chose Portsmouth, Ohio. This is a community that is in the south central part of the state, a town of about 20,000 folks in Scioto County. It's in a region that has a long history of industry and manufacturing. They've made everything there from steel to shoelaces to engine parts. And I think like many other communities that have been based on a production economy, this is a place that has been hard hit by globalization, job loss there, and economic decline. With the deterioration of its economy and really that loss of community fabric, if you will, it also became ground zero for the opioid epidemic. And I recently read an article that suggested that at one point during the height of prescription drug abuse in this area, there was 125 doses of opioids for every person living in that community, adult, child, everyone in that town. So you can imagine with that impact, not only come the drugs, but come many other challenges relating to addiction, whether it's infectious disease, human trafficking, burglary, murder, things that we don't expect to see in rural communities. Like many other folks, I first became aware of Portsmouth, Ohio, when I read a book by Sam Quinones called Dreamland. This is a book that really documents the history of the opioid epidemic, and it talks about its impact on places like Portsmouth, particularly rural areas. And I was forever changed. I read that book in 2016 and was really forever changed by what I read. A year later, I had a chance to go to Portsmouth, and I spent a day with community leaders there. And what I saw there, I think it's easy in terms of what inspires me about this community to focus on what I saw, the horrific impact that drugs can have on a rural area. But instead, what really inspires me about Portsmouth is what I saw happening there, that is the silver lining, if you will, in this epidemic. First, in Portsmouth, I saw a place where the community leaders have really circled the wagons and made an effort to build infrastructure, local infrastructure, not just to get people healthy, but really to address many of the issues that people need to have access to the resources for that long-term sobriety. Things like job training for second chance employment, transportation, parenting skills for mothers that are struggling with addiction. Much of what is going on in Portsmouth is happening out of an organization called the Counseling Center, and that is one of the pictures here that's featured on my slide. The second thing that inspires me about Portsmouth is that much of what is happening there that has been built there is used abandoned properties. And the Counseling Center picture that's featured here is actually the reuse of an old school. The day that I happened to spend in the community there, it was the opening of a new treatment clinic that was using 5 floors of a high-rise downtown. So not only is this development helping get people healthy, but it's bringing new hope as abandoned properties are put into use. And I think finally, Portsmouth inspires my work because there is considerable pride in that community. Even during the height of the opioid crisis, this is a place that celebrates its heritage. And for any of you that have worked in this area, particularly in rural communities, you will find often a broken sense of community. And I have found that it's a lot easier to reunify and to fix those connections when people are proud of where they've come from. So whether it's reuse of an abandoned property or helping get the services to families in need, community development finance has absolutely been a part of that story. And I think what's important when I look at the network in this room is not just the finance that you can bring to the table, but the capacity and that expertise that can enable what happens in a place like Portsmouth to be replicated elsewhere.
Portsmouth, Ohio. All right. But you've spent much of your time focusing on rural America. Was there an aha moment for you in any of this work that really brought home for you the importance of access to finance? in rural America?
Absolutely. I am from, I think it was mentioned in my bio, I'm from Indiana, and this is a state that has also been hard hit by drugs, particularly in the rural areas. And so when I think about an aha moment, I think about a place in south central Indiana, Scott County. This is a county that made national news several years ago. It's a county of about 16,000 folks and had a significant HIV outbreak due to injection drug use. And early on in my work in this issue, I got connected to a ministry there that works with a lot of families that are living in the throes of this issue, from helping kids that really don't have a safe home to go home to at night, to helping people who themselves are struggling with addiction get into treatment, helping grandparents that are raising grandbabies as a result of an addicted son or daughter. I had an opportunity, this ministry does a community, weekly community dinner, and I had a chance to go down and serve meals and just hang out with folks. And that night, just listening to some of the families that are walking this issue each day was really an aha moment for me that in many rural places, the driver of this issue is lack of hope. There's economic distress in these places, and when people don't have a hope about their future, the choices that they make for themselves or that others in their families make look significantly different than if they have a place of prosperity. I've later learned for any academics out there that there is some research that has backed up what my observations have been on the road, that this really does come back to economic distress in so many rural places. There's a rural sociologist at Syracuse University, Shannon Monette, who's done a lot of work in this area. So I think when we dial in to that root of economic distress, the importance of access to capital just cannot be overstated. Whether we're talking about creating jobs, business opportunity, infrastructure for communities that keeps an issue like drug addiction from settling in, or if it's a place that has already been impacted by this issue, people coming out of treatment to maintain that long-term recovery and sobriety, they need hope, and hope begins often with capital.
The opioid epidemic requires, as you say, a team effort. Folks from different fields helping to fight the fight. Well, CDFIs finance a lot of assets in rural America and in the rest of America. What can CDFIs do to be more helpful in this journey?
Well, we've talked a bit about capital and its importance and economic opportunity, but there are some other needs that are considerable in these places that have been impacted by addiction. Housing is a critical need. First transitional housing. When people come out of treatment, they might not be ready to live back on their own, and they need a place that's really a bridge to help get them from treatment into being stable in their recovery. Oftentimes, people also, beyond that transitional housing piece, just independent living opportunities in rural communities. If they have gone through treatment and they're in that recovery, they often cannot go back to the place that they lived when all that began. And so that can often raise the need for that housing piece as well. Transportation is a huge need, getting people to all of the appointments, and then of course, as they go into that recovery, maybe it's new education skills or workforce training that they need. And transportation is a big piece of that. Also, just to take back to the basics, healthcare infrastructure, greater access not just to addiction services in rural areas, but also there's often broader mental health challenges that are real in these places and underlie that addiction. We also need greater access to alternative therapies in rural areas, things like physical therapy, exercise, or massage as a different way to manage pain and not just going straight to medication. Beyond capital, I do again want to emphasize that this isn't just about funding. I think that the ability that CDFIs have to convene stakeholders around an issue, to that capacity need that is often so prevalent in rural areas. This is some of the core strengths that CDFIs bring to any issue, and it's particularly needed here. I'm thrilled that we do have some examples of CDFIs that are already active in this space. Jim King and Fahi have led the finance and the development of several recovery properties in Kentucky, and also going to that coordination piece. There was a need for a recovery task force, and his organization has been at the helm of pulling that all together. Also, Rural LISC has been an active investor in this issue.
I wondered when you were going to get there.
In helping build.
Okay, the interview's over now. It's all good.
Well, let me make a shameless pitch that at 2:15 today, we are having a breakout session where Jim and Suzanne with Rural LISC will be able to share what some of their journey around this issue has looked like. So I'm looking forward to being able to talk more about that in that setting. But at the end of the day, CDFIs are a core partner in rural prosperity. And as you get to work on this issue, you don't have to know a lot about drugs. Much of this comes down to lack of hope and opportunity, which is what you are experts in. So from Alaska to Maine, we need you in this fight. And I'm looking forward to working with everyone here in this room.
Well, we are grateful for your support. Again, grateful for your faithfulness, and looking forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Okay, next up is Ellen Lazar, among many things, a former head of the CDFI fund, to introduce our next guest, Ellen Lazar. Can I get a hug as well?
Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to be here at this auspicious gathering of so many community development, financial institution leaders and professionals, all of you working so hard for your communities. I also want to give a big shout out to Lisa Mensa and her team at OFN, who have done a fabulous job bringing OFN into the 21st century and into this new environment. One of those people who continues to work hard for our communities and low and moderate income people is our friend, Martin J. Gruenberg, Marty to many of us, who continues to serve the American people with passion and integrity. Marty has served on the board of directors of the FDIC, which he chaired for over 5 years, since 2005. As a regulator, he has worked tirelessly to make financial institutions work for all consumers, and he has been a key player in thinking about how the Community Reinvestment Act can best serve all Americans. Marty, in his many years as a congressional aide, serving as Congressman Jonathan Bingham, and later as senior counsel to Senator Paul Sarbanes, on the staff of the Senate Banking, Housing and Urban Affairs Committee, was actively involved in key legislation affecting our work. He took a deep professional and personal interest in the CDFI fund and much of our collective community development efforts. In the early years of the fund, he was crucial to many of us in providing advice and counsel that helped us grow and develop the CDFI fund into a successful, well-financed government program. On the Hill, Marty was a trusted advisor to many housing and community development efforts, including the creation of NeighborWorks America, where he now currently serves as chair. I can't think of a person who is a smarter, more committed public servant and supporter of our community development efforts than our friend Marty Gruenberg. Marty, please come out.
Welcome, Marty. Have a seat. Well, good morning, and welcome to a few good friends in this audience.
Morning.
I thought I'd start in a similar fashion that I've started with our last two panelists, which is to ask you to reflect on a place with which you have a personal connection and where finance, the lack thereof, the need for more, was a theme in the story.
Well, Maurice, as I think you know, I grew up in the Bronx in New York City, which is certainly was a defining experience for me. You know, both of my parents were immigrants from Poland who survived the Holocaust. And they first settled on Southern Boulevard in the South Bronx. And then when I was about 5, we moved to 195th Street and University Avenue in the West Bronx. For those of you who may be familiar with the Bronx, that's near Kingsbridge Road and the Grand Concourse. And my first job at a school was with my local congressman from the Bronx. Ellen actually referred to him, a wonderful man named Jonathan Bingham. And my job with Congressman Bingham was arguably the best job I ever had. It was, I was able to persuade him that the deal we had was that I would work in Washington 3 weeks a month, and then the 4th week, I'd go up to the district and work on housing and commercial development projects in the Bronx. And my parents still lived in the district at the time, so I had a place to stay. So we were able to kind of work out what's a pretty unusual arrangement. And you know, that opportunity to work on projects in the place you grew up and have a real attachment to was really a remarkable opportunity, and arguably the best learning experience, you know, I've ever had, because working on those projects, you really get a feel for the dynamics and what goes into making a development project work. And it's where I certainly learned the importance of getting community organizations to work together with local financial institutions and local government officials. You really do need that collaboration between the local players to make things work. And it was an enormous learning experience. And it became pretty clear, you didn't have to be a rocket scientist to figure this out, that finance was really central. That if you couldn't put the financing together, there's a lot of other things that went into it. But finance really drove the process. And I think that it was really that experience that triggered my interest in finance and financial regulation. And you know, the Bronx, and it became a nationally known symbol for urban challenges, and went through a long period of decline in the 70s and 80s, but then a remarkable period of recovery and rebuilding in the subsequent period. And it's really one of the great success stories today. And certainly apropos for today's program, it couldn't have been done without the work of community development financial institutions, really serving as a channel for a lot of the investment that went into that rebuilding process. So the Bronx was really stage one for me.
Yep. So we're celebrating the 25th year of the CDFI Fund, which has been a remarkable asset for the industry. And arguably, though, there's another piece of legislation, law on the books, if you will, that has been just as important to the industry, to low and moderate income communities, and that's the Community Reinvestment Act. First, I want to thank you. We owe you some gratitude for all the work you've done in that space for years. But tell us now, you know, where is CRA today in 2019, and what should those of us who want more capital going into low and moderate income communities be doing and thinking about and collaborating around as it relates to the Community Reinvestment Act?
Well, I'm sure everyone in this audience understands that CRA is really the foundation of finance in low and moderate income communities in the United States. You know, I started working for Congressman Bingham in 1979. I was actually...
You were 12.
I was... And actually was an intern in his office in 1977 when CRA was enacted. So I've been around since before and then immediately after CRA became law. And look, it's no secret that the banking industry, you know, before CRA, either didn't know these low and moderate income communities existed, or if they did, quite frankly, they were redlining those neighborhoods. That's what brought it back, the enactment of CRA in 1977 and the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act in 1975 around that issue of redlining. And the history of CRA has been a process of addressing that issue and bringing credit, investment, and basic banking services into these communities to help them develop and grow. And, you know, the thing that's most remarkable to me about CRA, and I could see it over the course of its history, and I remember when I started, you know, the banks and the community organizations, let's say, did not know each other well. And it was candidly a pretty adversarial relationship. And CRA, in my experience, really played a central role in bringing both the banks and the community organizations together. And there was a real process of learning and growth on the part of both in greater sophistication, so that in many places today, the collaboration between the community organizations and the banking institutions with the local government people are really the driver of neighborhood preservation and development. So CRA is central, and I don't think you can overstate it. We can all identify things to do to improve it, but you really have to understand that it is the starting point, the foundation of the work. And there is room to find ways to improve and strengthen CRA. There hasn't been a major revision to the CRA regulation since 1995. And there are some pretty obvious issues that could benefit from constructive attention. I think, you know, assessment areas, which is the areas around which CRA applies, has generally been based around the branch network, which I think are still critically important. But a lot of banks are now engaged in activity outside of their assessment areas. So finding ways to bring the activity outside of the assessment area within the scope of CRA while remaining very focused on the assessment area, I think is something that deserves attention. We need to look closely at the activities that qualify for CRA credit. And I think both banking institutions and community organizations would value some greater certainty around what activities and investments would qualify for CRA. So there's a constructive agenda going forward to make changes to strengthen and improve CRA, but that has to be the purpose and the focus of the work.
Well, we are grateful for your focus on this. We look forward to working with you some more. Give it up for Marty. Thanks, Marty. Nice to be with you. All right, for our final guest, Marla Balanik, the Executive Director of Latino Economic Development Center, will come to the stage and introduce our final guest.
Thank you, and good morning. I have the honor of introducing the Treasurer of the United States, Jovita Carranza. Ms. Carranza has demonstrated support for two issues dear to my heart: small business and financial literacy. She helps lead the Interagency Financial Literacy and Education Commission, has volunteered her time as a business coach through SCORE, and serves on the CDFI Funds Advisory Board. She was selected as Woman of the Year by Hispanic Business Magazine and earned the Woman of Distinction title by the American Association of University Women. She oversees the United States Mint, including Fort Knox, and serves as the Principal Senior Advisor to the Treasury Secretary on Community Economic Development and Engagement. And she signs dollar bills, too. Please join me in welcoming the 44th Treasurer of the United States, Jovita Carranza.
Welcome, Madam Treasurer.
Thank you.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you
Good
for
morning to
joining
everyone.
us.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here.
So let me start in a similar fashion that I have with our other panelists, which is tell us about a personal connection to a place and how this place has informed your work, your journey as a national policymaker, and whether finance was a part of the story.
You know, I studied that question. I had about 50 responses to that question, but I'm going to simplify it, considering that we have a few minutes to share with this audience, this great audience, as a matter of fact, that I applaud wholeheartedly for all of the accomplishments that they have achieved throughout these couple of, or triple, I guess 30 years plus. So I applaud everyone's, again, progress. From Chicago, where I was born and lived primarily all my life, I learned that poverty was not something that you wanted to really continue living within those particular parameters. So my upbringing taught me a need of and a focus on growth. And so as I progressed in my career trajectory, my corporate experience, as noted, I traveled to about 7 different states after 6 promotions. And in every community, I was responsible for helping develop community economics components, and that is a small business. In addition to realizing that small business owners, entrepreneurs had difficult accessing capital, I also recognized the need to understand financial acumen. I was provided some opportunities in the private sector with 7 promotions. As you know, you go from maybe signing a payroll check to looking at your center's budget to all of a sudden being responsible for $1 million contract signatures and up to $1 billion budgetary reviews. The picture that you see, I don't know if the audience is able to see that picture with my niece. I can see it very clearly.
You can see it now.
Okay, there. That's my 3rd generation. That's a niece. I had a picture like that with my daughter and my grandson, and now Stephanie, my niece, who
You look
is a
like her younger sister.
I appreciate that very much. I owe you.
You sign those bills, you know.
Yeah, well, I wasn't a treasurer at that time, so it was sincere in the sense that I sponsored 3rd generation, and she is the 1st generation attorney on my mother's side of the family, maternal. So it was really aspiring. So let me digress a little bit. Chicago, poverty, experience, and then I am fully supportive of upward mobility. obviously higher education. And I just saw in Stephanie a new innovation, a new path forward. Third generation, you try to get it right by the third time. And she's everything that we aspire for our third generation. You want to make sure it happens faster, smarter, and much more profitable. And that's how I really pursued life in general. So the experience that I had in Chicago up to supporting future leaders and entrepreneurs. And so my total exposure in my private corporate experience, as well as non-for-profit boards, has always been about job creation, access to capital, and also fortifying the local economy.
Terrific. As treasurer, tell us about some of your key accomplishments and priorities and how the CDFI industry can help to support some Treasury Department initiatives.
Well, I'm going to speak about financial literacy and education commission and the reform eventually. But I'd like to start out with how I ramped up as treasurer. When I was first interviewed by the secretary, he asked what I really could envision as the U.S. Treasurer. I had heard that the U.S. Treasurer's role was more of a ceremonial. Now, I'm not about ceremonies. I'm about policy and implementation, results, outcome-driven. And so I wanted to discover some opportunities and challenges so that I could make a significant contribution in my short time as treasurer. So I envision increasing the STEM student enrollment by 50% and increasing savings plans by 1 million in our underserved, unbanked, and underbanked communities. And I believe many of the people here have enabled that. I'd like to institutionalize financial literacy, so I thank you from the bottom of my heart. So I say that because I want you to realize you have a definite advocate. The secretary, in my interview, Secretary Mnuchin indicated that he wanted to elevate financial literacy and education because he understands how important it is. So when you tell me to elevate something, I assess it. In this case, I reform the Financial Literacy and Education Commission body of work. It does consist of 23 agencies, and all of them do some great work on tools and products, reinforces CDFIs and other community organizations. But I was looking at impact, and I know everyone here, when they assess where they're going to leverage the financing, you look at impact, sustainable impact, which is really what Treasury has been pursuing. We have been involved in developing, or we actually wrote reports, I should say, on the banking and non-banks, fintech, and I wrote, when I say I, my team, the Office of Consumer Policy, which consists of about 8 individuals, and we're focused on consumer protection, financial inclusion, and education, as well as financial literacy. And so with that team, we developed 2 reports just this year, June of this year. And one is on financial literacy and education reform, and the other is the best practices for financial literacy and education for post-secondary education. And we're going to have an event. I can't invite everyone here, but it's going to be out November 19th because of capacity at the White House, and we're going to invite educators and whatnot. Again, these are probably organizations or institutions that you work very closely with as CDFI leaders.
Was there an aha moment for you where the importance of access to capital for low-wealth households and entrepreneurs really struck home for you in your journey?
As I mentioned, I've traveled throughout the United States, but I've also traveled internationally. When Lisa talked about Ghana, I could envision the SMEs in Ghana and in Berlin. In Brazil, I was responsible for all of Latin America. So what occurs in Detroit, I've seen magnified in the emerging markets. So what happens in East Los Angeles, small business community that look for opportunities, job growth, charter schools, medical clinics, whatever business line of work that the communities are in need of. I realized that it takes access to capital. Low wealth typically translates to low collateral. You know, the only collateral my mother and father had were the home ownership, and I know how important home ownership is. You know, I have been designated as a delegate to the CDFI Advisory Board. And I'm going to explain many aha moments, because that's just one. The first meeting that I attended CDFI, I was challenging some of the things that we were reporting on, and somebody reminded me, that's one of our programs. You don't want to I'm like, oh, okay, I get it, okay. And so I had to step back. But it was because I saw so much opportunity to leverage the local organizations, the non-for-profits, the banks like B of A that just spoke earlier. I mean, I know that in reforming the Community Reinvestment Act, involved in that, we knew there was opportunity to improve the technical assistance that was being provided. And now with all of these financial literacy and education tools that we've developed, I'm hoping that everyone here is able to leverage that material. It took us 1.5 years to develop. So we're not in a numbers game, we're actually developing meaningful, valuable, high-impact tools. And hopefully the CDFI leadership will be able to implement. I didn't bring copies this time because they told me there were going to be about 1,500 people, but we definitely will make them available to you. But the aha moment is it's a matrix of all my experiences, and if you put it together, I need a whole week to tell you exactly where I started, who I'm engaged with, and what I'm planning to do moving forward. I know it's a short window, but I just think if you've ever been trained in the private sector, you can make a lot of things happen in a very short time.
We're grateful for your service, grateful for your support of the industry. We'll have you back so you can
Well,
tell
you're
us
not getting
about
rid of
more.
me just yet. I have something else I want to share with you.
Well,
We're not cutting this one short yet. I told you I'd get off track, right?
You signed the bills.
Yeah, I know. And I also oversee Fort Knox, so. And I have seen the gold, and I have carried it, so it is, our critical assets are in great hands.
I will get the car for you right after this.
Okay. But I did want to talk about Opportunity Zone.
Okay.
The tax incentive relief that I believe is going to definitely play a significant role in the CDFIs. I have brought the inner community to visit with, I call them the czar affectionately, of the Opportunity Zone at Treasury. And we've had meetings with Hispanic business owners that are looking to invest, Afro-American community bankers, and also other investors that want to learn more about this particular program. And it is designed to reinvigorate the communities that are underserved. You know, those particular 8,700 census tracts that have been targeted by governors, mayors, we're working with aldermen and city councilmen. They reflect about 50%, or within the population of the 8,700 census tracts, and you may have read this on the, what do they call it, opportunityzone.gov website. It represents 50% minority. And this is a community you and I know very, very well. I'm Hispanic, Mexican, my second generation. My parents were born in Chicago, but raised in Mexico. So I'm deep in culture, I'm deep in tradition, deep in faith, but I'm a tangible evidence of the American dream. And so I would love for other people to be able to realize it like I did, but much faster, much smarter, and again, and very strategically, because our investments are going to be looking at innovative IT, the water, the environmental, educational pursuits, and we talked about the opiate issues.
Well, we believe that if people truly want to use the incentive to have community impact, that they need to be working with CDFIs.
Yes, absolutely. No, thank you. Thank you.
We want you to tell all your friends about us. And we will be there, right?
Good.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Great to have you with us. You're going this way. You've heard from 4 national leaders, all of whom know what we do, respect what we do, and have been friends of ours for a long time. I want to also tip my hat to Lisa and her team for this great gathering. Happy birthday to the CDFI Fund. Happy birthday to the industry. There's more work to be done, so thank you all for all you do. Appreciate it.